Well, I find myself learning tremendously in these classrooms, and just to share that inside view of baseball, those lessons are for everyone. And so when you invest in those lessons, you not only create an environment and a culture around sport to celebrate, you build a community of citizens and committed servants to something larger than self that are wed to the notion that we are all part of something bigger.
Today I'm joined by one of our fine professors in Neag School of Education, Doug Glanville. So Doug, I'm going to try to describe you, and it will take me a time. Acclaimed author, media personality, activist, successful Major League Baseball player, husband, father, son. Thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Your hometown of Teaneck, New Jersey, voluntarily voted to desegregate public schools in 1964. There was de facto segregation due to housing practices, but was inclusiveness in the DNA of your hometown. So can you share a little more about your hometown and that experience and how it was growing in New Jersey?
And that's where it all starts, you know. I have to thank my parents for just setting the foundation. They chose a town that was in a pilot program that wanted to include people and have a diverse experience. And what I loved about it, it wasn't just sort of a punchline to a joke or a response to like, okay, we need to have better diversity. They really embodied it as a way of life. And so my experience growing up in the 70s, after they'd kind of settled in, was much more about seeing people of all walks of life all over the town, my little league, churches, synagogues, wherever we were. And I think as a young person growing up in that, with still the ideals and the aspirations, we felt that this was something we wanted to embrace as well, not only just in the times we're home, but just, you know, really see it as a worldview. So that was truly part of the DNA, and I think it became part of our DNA of my class. I graduated in 1988, and I really took that experience about bringing people together in unity and a sense of fairness and learning how to solve difficult problems through various identities and yet come together around it. And I think that was sort of accentuated by being in sports and seeing that in an environment where you're really trying to do that as an objective goal of your success. And Teaneck really tied it all together.
Mm-hmm. So you wrote and narrated a powerful video essay entitled Enough, following the tragic death of George Floyd. What compelled you to take that project on, and what do you hope people took away from it? I could see already in your growing and you know, bringing experience as a baseball player, but what was like really that you wanted to do like powerful video essay?
Yeah, well, it sort of ties very closely to my experience growing up. And you hear sometimes the phrase about difficult conversations, but I found that I was fairly comfortable in a lot of these conversations because I grew up where we were always working towards solutions. And when you're in that environment and you see the people you're working with as colleagues, as part of the solution, it's a lot easier to see it as something that is important and it grows the community as opposed to like uncomfortable or confrontational. So that was the baseline. And so working at ESPN for a long time, I've always been interested in doing more than just calling the game or talking about the players and their shoe contract or whatever it may be. I wanted to understand what made them tick, what was behind the scenes, what they cared about, and how they use this incredible platform to change. And a lot of that led to really creating a truly level playing field, right? Not just on the field, but actually in the field of life. And so my sports experience informed this opportunity to talk more than just about the athlete and the sport. And that tied very well to when we had this horrific tragedy and this police confrontation with really a communities of color in a larger scale that concentrated around the murder of George Floyd. That was an opportunity to talk more and to watch the athletes react to that was also part of sport and what sport can be. So that's what compelled me, and I think it was I was a little surprised that ESPN would say, okay, let's go. They green lighted it. They kind of approached me to a certain degree, knowing that I've done these projects. And we had to, proceed with caution to be mindful of what videos we showed and what words we chose. It was vetted at various levels, but ultimately they got all behind it. And I realized that this was a tough project. My editor had to watch these videos over and over again, so I had to be mindful of his stress level. And unfortunately, it really came together in a way that, had the impact. And that was what I was hoping for. I was hoping to elevate sport in a way to focus on its positives, the sense of unity, the sense of equity, that we share and follow the same rules, but also a sense of how we can chart the course. And this opportunity to combine the two with this video, put it all together.
So in the article for The Atlantic, you authored in 2014, before Lloyd Ford, you talked about the incident that you personally experienced while shoveling your driveway in Hartford. And I really appreciate if you can share what did you learn from that experience? What was your family reaction? What was authority reaction? And what did change?
Yeah, that was tough. I mean, my family, my wife, and now we have 4 kids at the time. Our 4th wasn't born yet. But we lived in Hartford, right at the border with West Hartford. So to give some context, it was snow days, and as a parent, you're like, all right, I gotta get this minivan out of the driveway. So I'm determined to get the snow out of there and shovel. So it was midday, it was really cold that day. And I noticed that a West Hartford police car pulled up across the street. Now I'm from New Jersey, and also now being in New England, I know how provincial we are about, like, this is your town line, that's your town line. So it was strange to see an officer from another town in Hartford. Hadn't seen that up until then, and we weren't there that long. And so eventually, when he came out of his car, he kind of a young guy, no facial hair, and had the ski cap mask thing on. And I kind of saw him walking towards me, so I was like, oh. So I kind of stand up, and he says, so you're trying to make some extra bucks shoveling people's driveway around here. So of course that totally shifted my whole, wait a minute, what's going on right now? He's like, this is my driveway. But I realized that you're at a huge disadvantage of, well, how do you explain that? Will he believe me? Is this gonna be worse than what I think? What is he actually looking for? I don't know anything. And he didn't take any time to introduce himself or explain anything, so I'm just sort of flat-footed. And so eventually whatever I said was enough for him to decide to leave and kind of, say happy shoveling or something, and took off. And in a way, the best description was almost feeling like you were robbed of something, right? This is, you're taking care of your house, you're not thinking about anything, you're trying to get your kids to school the next day, and all of a sudden, just in a flash, not only is your life possibly in jeopardy, but the moment is something that takes away from what you felt you had built on a certain level. You're a homeowner, you're taking pride, you have your family you're looking after, you're protecting, and you can't protect really yourself in that moment. So it was really disconcerting, but I think the experience went in a different direction than I could ever imagine, because I remember I had a colleague working for me as an assistant, and he immediately went to Twitter and kind of blasted West Hartford and the police. And I said, you have to take this down. Like, we don't know anything right now. We're still figuring out what happened. And so I took the next couple of days after he took it down to meet with West Hartford Police. My wife is an attorney by trade, and my neighbor also an attorney. So they agreed, they both said, we'll accompany you to meet West Hartford Police. So that started the conversation. So I took a couple of months to just learn about this, the process, the laws, policing, all these things. And then eventually I wrote an article for The Atlantic that you mentioned to just tell the story of the experience. And I remember how hard it was not to turn it into something really emotional. My editor was like, look, just tell the story. Because that in and of itself is compelling. You're a father, you're a parent, you're a husband, and you're just shoveling, and just tell the story of the day, and then how it was turned upside on its head, and sort of the feeling of injustice about it. So I think what I learned in that process was I took my time before I rushed to write and judge. I wanted to understand. And in that process, I didn't realize that it was kind of a Pied Piper experience. Like more people started to hear you cared about fairness. You cared that you wanted to listen to police and understand their experience. And caring about everyone involved kind of brought more people to the table, and seeing that the solution involved all of us. And it wasn't only about vindication or finger pointing. I just wanted to really first bring everybody into the space of trying to solve and come up with an approach that would, bring something restorative. And so that process became ultimately legislation. Our neighbor 2 doors down is the Speaker of the House, Matt Ritter, currently, and he wrote up a bill after we did our research, and it ultimately became a law in Connecticut. But in the process of advocating, I learned very quickly that, well, wait a minute, it isn't really about the final outcome. Yes, you want to achieve something, but really the process of getting there is where you bring and have the opportunity to bring people together. Because step by step, more people were getting invested in the outcome. And I realized that they were from very different backgrounds. There were West Hartford citizens, there were people from Hartford, there were police, and you said, oh, all right, more people are invested, and the more they are, the more that solution will have staying power, and the more people will invest in the outcome and its ability to address problems in the future. And that was eye-opening to me, because it wasn't about the outcome. So, but it was challenging. It was painful, obviously, and it took a long time. It was almost 2 years. But I think the outcome was very positive overall, and ended up on the Connecticut Police Officer Standards and Training Council for now almost 6 years in helping train officers, helping set the curriculum, certifying and decertifying officers, accreditation, and actually at the table to forge reform, but also support not only communities, but officers.
Oh, that's amazing. You're a peace builder. You're a community builder, and you are a wise man. So in that article, you quoted by saying the following: my world is shaped by the idea of building bridges, diplomacy, and creating understanding in a thoughtful and patient way. That's so powerful. So in that experience, you learned to include different points of view. You didn't judge, you observed, you were patient, you were sitting down, you were listening your wife and advices of many. What influence in your life, that experience, you bring now to any-day problems, or how you approach situation, or how you act as a mentor, as a teacher, as a father, and teach your children?
And it's informed by those experiences and the lessons learned, how you approached it, and to a large degree going back to growing up in a town that worked consistently on how to bring people together. So that experience really informs and colors everything that I do. And given I'm also the son of educators, my father taught for many years before he went to medical school and became a psychiatrist. So there's a lot of patience in that. And my mother was a math teacher, and she taught ultimately in my school system. So having that education background comes with patience and an interest in mentoring, but also seeing mentorship as reciprocal. That just like I teach the class at UConn, I always feel like I learn as much as I teach. And I think that approach in any problem-solving scenario yields very powerful dividends, because you start to see that you have a lot to learn, but you have a lot to offer. And I think when people see that openness, they may take the same tone, which is why I could walk in a room with law enforcement under a very challenging circumstance and feel like there's something positive that can come out of it, even when I was very upset in the moment. And so that's very much informed not only being a father, being a husband, and the patience involved raising kids and knowing their timeline of learning. I think it's all worked well together, and having a partner in life and my wife where we forged this path together, and knowing that, okay, we're gonna stay up late tonight to try to figure out like who's driving who to the basketball game tomorrow. Many conversations. So all of it's come together really well. And so in many ways, I'm thankful for having some challenging experiences, because it's really given me a certain strength around problem solving and working together with people.
Shortly after you retired, you authored a book, very popular book, The Game, From Where I Stand, and Ball Player Inside View. So what did make you to want to sit down and spend time writing the book and share your experience? And who encouraged you to undertake that project?
Well, it has a lot to do with my dad. I lost my father probably now about 20 years ago. But when I was right before I was about to graduate college, my dad had a stroke, actually a heart attack then, and then he did recover. And so when I finally made it to the major leagues in baseball, the first thing he said is, I almost missed this. So, he passed away eventually. Actually, the day I got my 1,000th hit of my career. So we were always lockstep in a certain kind of synergy. So my dad was very passionate about poetry and would disappear, as a psychiatrist, but he was a very Renaissance man. He would go off and write and kind of disappear and have a poem in mind and self-publish a couple of books. So beautiful words he left behind. So I always had a connection to this writing, and I didn't always appreciate it at the time, but I was very fortunate in my high school. I have excellent English teachers. So when I put it all together at one point, I was, had my career in baseball, and I noticed that this breaking news was happening around the performance-enhancing drugs, the steroids in baseball, and the commentary was kind of linear. It was like, all right, let's name names, let's call people out. And I wasn't seeing a lot of analysis. Well, why do these players take steroids in the first place? Like what? And I knew a lot about it as a player. So I started writing. And I think I found that experience so therapeutic and so reciprocal and so powerful that I kind of kept getting into it. And I remember from that first article, I had a colleague, Alan Swartz, who went to Penn with me, he was older, and wrote for the Daily Pennsylvanian. He was like, you need to write another version of this for the New York Times. And I was like, the New York Times, amazing. So I pitched the Times on a series, and remarkably, halfway through my pitch, they were like, here's a column, just go run with it. And then I was like, can I actually do this? This is, but it ended up being one of the greatest things I was done in writing. And so that led to the book, because the articles seemed to resonate, and more as that happened, the publishing industry started noticing. So I was able to get a publisher and an agent, and was able to put this book together. I was inspired by a lot of the columns I wrote for the Times, and just to share that inside view of baseball. And I wanted it to be different. I didn't want it to be this like rollout. I was born here, I was raised, I hit a home run, and when I thought it'd be good to just go really inside about what is it like to find an apartment when you break spring training, and dating, and financial planners, and buying a car. I just wanted to cover all the things that are behind the scenes, and it was a lot of fun writing it.
So let's talk about your baseball career. So when I asked you how did the school, and you told me at age of 20 you went to play professional baseball player, and you played for Chicago Cubs during the 2003 playoff, and you got the game-winning hit in Game 3. But let's also talk about infamous Game 6 and your experience as a baseball player.
Yeah, well, it was incredible. I think that's why, because it was incredible, I ended up writing this book, because I just wanted to capture the awe-inspiring feeling that I had all throughout my career. Even when I was a veteran, I still had that sense of awe. And it's important, which is what I kind of connected to why steroids kind of takes away something from you, because you lose like the authentic performer. You go, wow, like I want to be awed, and here people are cutting corners. And I wanted to kind of recapture that. So baseball was very grounding for me in that way. It was my escape. I was an engineer, and you're thinking, and I wanted to just like see ball, hit ball, and baseball became also a place where I could kind of reconnect to the diversity I celebrated so much in growing up in Teaneck, because you had players from all over the world trying to figure out how to come together as a team. I found that to be one of the more powerful and exciting parts of what I experienced as a professional, to meet people from Venezuela and Dominican and China and wherever, and just like, we're one team, and working on that. So, baseball became such a pathway too for opportunity, and because when you have you're part of this fabric of pop culture in a sense, you do get opportunities and people look to you for certain things, and therefore you're able to open certain doors, or doors are open to you. So baseball became all these things, and ultimately connected me to the media world with people who I used to work with who were covering me as an athlete, to being on the other side of the microphone, ultimately, to being able to talk about it in a way that was, informing the description of what I was experiencing, but also what I hoped to do when my career was over. And so loved the game since I was a kid. My brother taught me the game as soon as I could walk, and still love the game. So that's been a lifelong passion. And I was living the dream when I was putting on that uniform, and as Bull Durham says, the cathedrals of the game. Every day was just a gift, and eventually I was kind of the old man and had to hang up the spikes and take it home. But I felt like I was very well set up when I did that because of baseball and that opportunity.
So, Doug, some people will say baseball is a game of failure, but you had been so successful. You had been successful as a baseball player, you had been successful as a writer, you had been successful as an educator, as a mentor, as a father. So what did you learn from that failure part of the game? How that make you more resilient, more stronger, wanted to excel all the time?
Very humbling game. And I think the humility that comes with that, that's definitely a big lesson. You have to, know that, okay, you got me today, but I always say baseball is also a game of tomorrows. Okay, you got me today, but, 2 weeks from now we play the Marlins again. You have to have patience. And I also found baseball to be very important in teaching me about pattern recognition and, okay, what are you trying to do to me? How are you trying to get me out? The patience that goes with the study and the preparation for it. And knowing, okay, I'm going to sit here and hit off of you now. You got me that time. And now I have to wait 3 more innings. But you have to try to figure out how to continue to grow and adjust and adapt, because they're coming at you again. And it might not be today, it might be in 6 months, it might be 5 years that you finally see that guy again. So that is something that really translated and resonated with me about everyday life. The patience, the know that you have to continue to adapt and adjust, that tomorrow you might have a new opportunity to be ready, and to not get caught up in like, oh, I failed today and I didn't, and that's it. You're like, wait a minute, like another game's coming at you. It's this everyday game, 162 days, 162 games. You're out there being given what I see as opportunities.
No time for grieving.
Yeah, it's like by the time you realize it, like, oh, here's another one. So on the flip side, you can't exactly dance in the streets that easily as well too, because tomorrow there's another game to be played. So it preaches, there's a very even keeledness to figuring out how to be even and patient and see the long game. And that helped me a lot in some of the incidents you talked about, working with the police. I had to see the long game. I had to believe that the reward wasn't immediate. It wasn't going to be right then. I wasn't going to fix policing in that minute. I had to look at it as a project that takes time and investment. Well, baseball was everything about that. That was the nature of the sport. So you also get to the stage where you reinterpret even the term failure. Is this really a failure? Or is this an opportunity to grow and change and adapt? Is this information? Is this something that's teaching me something? I think you start to also reinterpret it because it's happening so much. You're out, you ground out 3 out of 10 times, you're a successful hitter. So you also learn to redefine what it even means to fail. And I think baseball has had me push back against what that's even defined as.
So Doug, I very much appreciate your mission of being a teacher. I heard from our students that your course is so popular that there are so many that want to sign and get a slot. You teach in our Neag School of Education. Your course is called as Sport in Society. So if you can share with us about curriculum, why it's so popular, what are the questions the students ask, what is the level of curiosity, and what is the joy that you get out of that course?
Yeah. Well, I got a lot of joy out of it. And in some ways, I mentioned my parents. It's a nod to them. being able to be an educator. And I think I get so much because I found it very quickly to be a truly reciprocal experience. You know, I don't subscribe to the idea that I'm just pouring everything at them and I'm just lecturing them. I see it as bouncing back to me and adapting to their lessons and where they are in their lives and kind of adjusting what resonates and figuring out what they care about. So I find myself learning tremendously in these classrooms. And I think the way the course came together was, you know, it was like one of those almost divine moments of inspiration. I mentioned that it was often challenging to be in the sports realm and intersect this idea of sport and society, that social justice or concern or the consequences outside of the sport, off the field, was equally important to talk about, to address, to share, to invest in. That was hard. It's hard in sports media when you have a stick to sports world sometimes coming down on you. I don't want to hear about that. I'm here to be entertained. Understanding those points of view, but at the same time, seeing the opportunity that's there to kind of elevate that platform to bring people together. So I started writing. I started, you know, just like what I love to do. I started writing, and these were all the elements and aspects I wanted to talk about in sports that I didn't feel like I had a lot of room to do that. And when I looked at it, it's like, you know, this might be a class, or maybe it's something I could send to the Players Association and help them navigate social issues. I just thought it could be a resource of some sort. And I slowly started going all over the place. I went over the state, I went to different universities, I talked to coaches, and I just asked them about the curriculum. I said, well, you know, what do you think? And I took the feedback and kept adapting it. And I remember meeting different professors at different schools, and I decided to try it at my alma mater because I knew they would just say go. So they said go. Excuse me. And so when they told me to go, they said, here's a class, take over, teach what you want, let's see what happens. And it went well received, and then they just gave me a class. And from there, I've just gradually kept gaining the input from the students and keep adapting it. It started off in the School of Communication, so it was very media-driven, sports, society, and the media. It wasn't called that, but that was the themes. And then it became a political science class at Yale, and then it became more of an athletes and activism and policy, changing how to actually enact change. And then slowly, as I expanded it and wanted to get the best of all worlds, UConn came along and was like, let's just tie this all together, make it a writing class, which of course is a dream of mine, right? Because I love writing. So it's a writing class that now has the political components of legislation, but it has the legal side of change. It has the components of media and how this is, of course, my field, so I can relate to talking about how change happens, the constructs. You talk about how, you know, athletes use social media. How is it effective? How do you actually forge change in law? What's the process? What's the process of leveraging your political capital? All that was part of this course. And so when students come out of it, I hope that they will get a sense of the history of sports and activism and how it's always been there, always. How, in fact, when you were running for election back, you go back to the 1890s, 1880s, they were called races because you were more qualified the more athletic you were. You competed, literally, boxing, whatever it was. That made you a viable candidate. And then slavery ended, and there was new citizens on deck, and immigration was strong. The rules kind of changed, and it became more of a stick to sports. Let's separate these two, almost like church and state. So knowing that there's cyclical nature, and sometimes power may dictate who gets to stick to sports, so to speak, and who doesn't, we started to look at this from a historical standpoint and bring it forward to the current state of activism and what athletes and sports are doing today. And there's so much. I mean, I never run out of content. Every day I just like, oh, did you see that story? So once you get to that, now we break down how change happens, how it actually goes through these systems. And in the spirit of aspirationally what the best of sports provide, as we spoke about, and that is a sense of unity across any identity, because we have that common goal, and the sense of power that you have, because equity is at the center of having a sport that has true fidelity and integrity. And when you bring those together with those kinds of powers, that is something worth discussing and sharing and exchanging. And I think the students receive it well, but they also give it back tenfold.
You know, I could see how impeccable you are with your words, and you are such a gentle and humble person. So by writing, you invite so many people to read and learn. And life is about being open to learn. And I'm so grateful that you landed at UConn, that many generations of our students will have opportunity to meet you, learn from you, listen about your experience, go home and think what you said in the class, and come tomorrow to ask you more questions. It was really my honor and pleasure to be with you, and thank you for sharing your time and experience.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.